My dad's like, I was like, I'm gonna read, and he goes, now to get comfortable
Timber,
because he reads with me.
please stop.
All right. We just got back. They had a late customer, which is always absolutely the worst thing. Don't go to a store 15 minutes before and go do your grocery shopping. Don't go in 15 minutes before if you're not going to just get a handful of things. Go earlier and don't spend a half an hour there.
Or go on your day off.
You know. Sometimes there's those last minute things, but still, don't go when it's just 15 minutes before, 5 minutes before even. Oh my Lord. Then the light shut off and I'm out there in complete darkness and I'm like, did the light die? Did it blow? Is it supposed to be off? Did y'all know it's dark out here? I did too. All right, so we are on part 4. Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 1, chapter 2. Yes, we are in chapter 2, part 4. Steve tried to speak and couldn't. Tried again and still couldn't. Although this time he did manage a single dry squeak. You sound like a mouse farting behind a baseboard, he thought. He was aware that Cynthia was squeezing his hand in a grip powerful enough to be painful, but pain didn't seem to matter. A large cup, like the Steelers cup.
Of what?
Iced tea. I'm reading. You talk. Apparently my thing was still going on Facebook. He's like, you reading a book? I'm like, no, I'm reading. I don't know why I'm yawning. I do apologize. He didn't know how long they would have stood there in the doorway of the big room at the end of the Poinsett hut if the wind hadn't blown something over outside and sent it clattering down the street. Cynthia gasped like someone who had been punched and put a hand, not holding Steve's, up to one side of her face. She turned and looked at him that way, so she could only see one wide, horrified eye. Tears were trickling down from it. Why? She whispered. Why? I'm on Twitch. Reading. What? I'm trying to read. Why do you keep writing me? Oh, I apologize. I don't know why I'm yawning. All right. He shook his head. He didn't know why. He didn't have a clue. The only 2 things he was sure of were that the people who had done this were gone, and he and Cynthia would have been dead already. And that he, Steve Ames of Lubbock, Texas, did not want to be here if they decided to come back. Ah. The large space at the end of the Quonset hut looked like a combination workroom, lab, and storage area. It was lit by hanging high-intensity lamps with metal hoods. A little like the lights which hung over the tables in billiard emporiums. They cast a bright, lemony glow. Oh my goodness. My eyes gotta water. Gotta be allergy season, doesn't it? It looked to Steve as if 2 crews might have worked here at the same time, one doing assay work on the left side of the room, the other sorting and cataloging on the right. There were Danduk's laundry baskets lined up against the wall on the sorting side, each with chunks of rock in it. These had clearly been sorted. One basket was filled with rocks that were mostly black, another with smaller rocks, almost pebbles, that were shot through with glitters of quartz. I don't know why. On the assay side, it's ASSAY. Assay? If that was what it was. There was a line of Macintosh computers set up on a long table littered with tools and manuals. And those are, I don't know why they use Mac. The Macs were running screensaver programs. One featured pretty multicolored helix shapes above the words gas chromatograph already. Chromatograph ready. Another, surely not Disney sanctioned, showed Goofy pulling down his pants every 7 seconds or so, revealing a large boner with the words Hayek, 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 Hayek written on it. His laugh. At the far end of the room, inside a closed overhead garage door with the words Welcome to Hernando's Hideaway printed on it in blue letters, was an ATV with an open carrier hook up behind it. This was also full of rock samples. On the wall to its left was a sign reading You must wear a hard hat. MSHA regulation. No excuses. There was a row of hooks running below the sign. There were no hard hats hung from them. The hard hats were scattered on the floor below the dangling feet of the people who had been hung from the hooks. Hung like roasts in a butcher's walk-in freezer. Steve? Steve? Are they like dummies? Department store mannequins? Is it, a joke? No. The word was small and felt as dusty as the air outside, but it was a start. You know they're not. Let up, Cynthia. You're breaking my hand. Don't make me let go, she said in a weary voice. Her hand was still up to her face, and she stared one-eyed at the dangling corpses across the room. On the radio, the tractors had been replaced by David Lee Murphy, and David Lee Murphy had given way to an ad for a place called Whalen's, which the announcer described as Austin's anything store. Yes. You don't have to let go. Just let up a little, Steve said. He raised his unsteady finger and began to count. 1, 2, 3. I think I wet my pants a little, she said. Don't blame you. 4, 5, 6. We have to get out of here, Steve. This makes the guy who broke my nose look like Santa Claus. Be quiet and let me count. She fell silent. Her mouth trembling and her chest pitching as she tried to contain her sobs. Steve was sorry, he shouted. This one had been through a lot even before today. But he wasn't thinking very well. Christ, he wasn't entirely sure he was thinking at all. 13, he said. 14, she corrected in a shaky, humble voice. Do you see? In the corner? One of them fell off. One of them fell off the hook, was what she was trying to say. But the stutter turned into miserable little cries, and she began to weep. Steve took her in his arms and held her, feeling her hot, wet face throb against his chest, low on his chest. She was so goddamn small. Over the fuzz of an extravagantly colored hair, he could see the other side of the room. She was right. There was another body crumpled in the corner. 14, dead and all. At least 3 of them women, with their heads hanging and their chins on their chests. It was hard to tell for sure about some of the others. 9 were wearing lab coats. No, 10, counting the one in the corner. 2 were in jeans and open-necked shirts. Two others were wearing suits, string ties, dress boots. One of these appeared to have no left hand, and Steve had a pretty good idea of where that hand might be. Oh, yes, indeed, he did. Most had been shot, and they must have been facing their killers, because Steve could see gaping exit wounds in the back of most of the dropped heads. At least three, however, had been open like fish. They hung with their white coats stained maroon and pools of blood beneath them and their guts dangling. Now here's Mary Chapin Carpenter to tell us why she feels lucky today, the radio announcer said, emerging gamely from another blast of static. Maybe she's been on to Whalen's in Austin. Let's find out. Mary Chapin Carpenter began to tell the hanging dead men and women in the lab of the Desperation Mining Corporation about her lucky day. How she'd won the lottery and all. Steve let go of Cynthia. He took a step into the lab and sniffed the air. No gun smoke that he could smell. Maybe that didn't mean much. The air conditioners probably turned over the air in here pretty fast. But the blood was dry on the corpses, which had been eviscerated. And that probably meant whoever had done this was long gone. Let's go, Cynthia hissed, tugging his arm. Okay, he said, He broke off as something caught his eye. It was sitting on the end of the computer table to the right of the screen with the goofy flasher on it. Not a rock, or not just a rock anyway. Some kind of stone artifact. He walked over and looked down at it. The girl scurried after him and yanked his arm again. What's the matter with you? This isn't a guided tour. What if... Then she saw what he was looking at. Really saw it, and broke off. She reached out a tentative finger and touched it. She gasped and drew her finger back. At the same moment, her hip jerked forward as if she'd gotten an electric shock, and her pelvis banged into the edge of the table. Holy shit, she breathed. I think I just... And there she stopped. Just what? Nothing. But she looked as if she was blushing, so Steve guessed maybe it was something at that. There ought to be a picture of that thing next to ugly in the dictionary. It was a rendering of what might have been a wolf or a coyote, and although it was crude, it had enough power to make them both forget, at least for a few seconds, that they were standing 60 feet from the leftovers of a mass murder. The beast's head was twisted in a strange angle, and somehow hungry, a somehow hungry angle, and its eyeballs appeared to be starting out of their sockets in utter fury. Its snout was wildly out of proportion to its body, almost the snout of an alligator, and it was split open to show a jagged array of teeth. The statue, if that's what it was, had been broken off just below the chest. What? They're not fighting over it. It's all good. Nah, they've been taking turns over it. But once somebody's got it, they don't usually fight over it. The statue, if that's what it was, had been broken off just below the chest. There were stumps of forelegs, but that was all. The stone was pitted and eroded with age. It was glittery in places, too, like the rocks collected in one of the Dandex baskets. Beside it, anchored by a plastic box of pushpins, was a note. Jim. What the hell is this? Any idea? Barbie. Look at its tongue, Cynthia said with a strange, dreaming voice. What about it? It's a snake. Yes, he saw it was. A rattler, maybe. Something with fangs, anyway. Cynthia's head snapped up. Her eyes were wide and alarmed. She grabbed his shirt again and pulled it. What are you doing? She asked. This isn't art appreciation class. For Christ's sake, we've got to get out of here. Yeah, we do, Steve thought. The question is, where do we go? They'd worry about it when they got to the truck. Not in here. He had an idea it would be impossible. to do any productive thinking in here. Hey, what happened to the radio? She asked. Huh? He listened, but the music was gone. I don't know. With a strange, set expression on her face, Cynthia reached out to the crumbling fragment on the table again. This time she touched it between its ears. She gasped. The hanging lights flickered. Steve saw them flicker, and the radio came back on. Hey, Dwight. Hey, Lyle. Boys. You don't need to fight, Mary Chapin Carpenter sang through the static. Hot dog, I feel lucky tonight. Right, Steve said. Why'd you do that? Cynthia looked at Steve. Her eyes looked oddly hazy. She shrugged, touched her tongue to the middle of her upper lip. I don't know. Suddenly she put her hand on her forehead and squeezed her temples hard. When she took it away, her eyes were clear again, but frightened. What the hell? She said, more to herself than him. Steve reached out to touch the thing himself. She grabbed his wrist before he could. Don't. It feels nasty. He shook her off and put his finger on the wolf's back. All at once, he was sure that was what it was. Not a coyote, but a wolf. The radio went dead again. At the same time, there was a cough of broken glass from somewhere behind them. Cynthia yelped. Steve had already taken his finger off the rock. He would have done that even if nothing at all had happened, because she was right. It felt nasty. For a moment, something did happen. It felt as if one of the more vital circuits in his head had shorted out, for one thing, except, hadn't he been thinking about the girl? Doing something to the girl, with the girl? The kind of thing both of you might like to try, but would never talk about to your friends? Kind of experiment? Even as he was mulling this over, trying to remember what the experiment might have been, he was reaching out for the stone again with his finger. He didn't make a conscious decision to do this, but now that he was, it seemed like a good idea. Just let that old finger go where it wants, he thought, bemused. Let it touch whatever it... She grabbed his hand and twisted it away from the piece of stone, just as he was about to put his finger on the wolf's back. Hey, sport, read my lips. I want to get out of here right now. He took a deep breath, let it out, repeated the process. His head began to feel like familiar territory again, but he was suddenly more frightened than ever. Of exactly what, he didn't know. Wasn't sure he wanted to know. Okay, let's go. Holding her hand, he led her back into the hallway. He glanced over his shoulder once at the crumpled gray bit of carving, twisted, predatory head, bulging eyes, too long snout, snake tongue, and beyond it, something else. Both the helix and the exhibitionist Goofy were gone. Those screens were dark, as if some power surge had shorted them out. Water was pouring through the open door of the office with the aquarium in it. There was a molly stranded at the end of the hallway carpet, flopping its last. Well, he thought, now we know what broke. No need to wonder about that. Don't look when we go by, he said. Just... Did you hear something just then? She asked. Bangs or booms or something like that? He listened, and heard only the wind, and then thought he heard a stealthy shuffling from behind him. He wheeled around quickly. Nothing there. Of course there wasn't. What had he been thinking? That one of the corpses had wriggled down off its hook and was coming after them? Dumb. Even under these stressful circumstances, that was plumb loco. Wild Bill. But there was something else. Something he couldn't dismiss. Dumb or not, that statue. It was like a physical presence in his head. A thumb poking broodly into the actual tissue of his brain. He wished he hadn't looked at it. Even more, he wished he hadn't touched it. David? Steve? Jesus, I'm thinking back at the kid. Steve, did you hear anything? It could have been gunshots. There's another one. The wind screamed along the side of the building, and something else fell over out there, making them scream out and grab for each other like kids in the dark. What? What? Go get your bone. Get your bone. Stop screaming at Mama and go eat your bone. Oh, now you want to play. They're out for each other like kids in the dark. The thing that had fallen over went scraping along the ground outside. I don't hear anything but the wind. Probably what you heard was a door banging shut somewhere. If you heard anything. There were at least 3 of them, she said. Maybe they weren't gunshots, more like thuds, but could have been something flying in the wind, too. Come on, Cookie. Let's shake some tail feathers. Don't call me Cookie, and I won't call you Cake, she said faintly, not looking when they passed the office with the water still draining out of it. Steve did. The aquarium was now nothing but a rectangle of wet sand surrounded by jags of glass. The hand lay on the soaked carpet beside the desk. It had landed on its back. There was a dead guppy stranded on its palm. The fingers seemed almost to beckon him. Come on in, stranger. Pull up a chair. Take a load off. Mi casa es su casa. No thanks, Steve thought. He had no more than started to open the door between the literary reception area and the outside when it snatched prankishly out of his hands. Dust was blown past its ribbons. The mountains to the west had been completely obliterated by moving membranes of darkening gold, sand and alkali grit flying in the day's last 10 minutes or so of light. But he could see the first stars glowing clearly overhead. The wind was at near gale force now. A rusty old barrel with the words Zoom Chemtronics, dispose of properly, stenciled on it, rolled across the parking lot, past the rider truck, and across the road. Into the desert it went. The tink, tink, tink of a lanyard clip against the flagpole was feverish now, and something to their left thumped twice, hard, a sound like a silencer muffled pistol shots. Cynthia jerked against him. Steve turned toward the sound and saw a big blue dumpster. And as he looked, the wind half lifted its lid, then dropped it. There was another muffled thump. There's your gunshots, he said, raising his voice to be heard over the wind. Well, it didn't sound just like that. A concentration of coyote howls rose in the night, some from the west, flying to them on the wind and grit, some from the north. Playtime, I guess. Belle? All right, hold on. The sound reminded Steve of old news clips he'd seen of Beatlemania, girls screaming their heads off for the mop tops from Liverpool. He and Cynthia looked at each other. Come on, he said. The truck, right now. They hurried to it, arms around each other and the wind at their backs. When they were in the cab again, Cynthia locked her door, bopping the button down decisively with the heel of her hand. Steve did the same, then started the engine. Its steady rumble and the glow from the dashboard when he pulled the headlights knob comforted him. He turned to Cynthia. All right. Where do we go to report this? Austin's out. It's too far west and in the direction this shit's coming from. We'd end up by the side of the road, hoping we could start the damn engine again once the storm passed. That leaves Eli, which is a 2-hour drive, longer, if the storm overtakes us. Or downtown Desperation, which is maybe less than a mile. Eli, she said at once. The people who did this could end up there in town. And I doubt if a couple of local cops or even county mounties could match up to guys who could do what we saw in there. The people who did it Could also be back on Route 50. Back on Route 50, he said. Remember the RV, the boss's bike? But we did see traffic, she said. Then jumped as something else fell over nearby. It sounded big and metallic. Christ, Steve, can we please just get the fuck out of here? He wanted to as badly as she did, but he shook his head. Not until we figure this out. It's important. 14 dead people. And that doesn't count the boss and the people from the RV. The Carver family? This is going to be big when it comes out nationwide. If we go back to Eli and it turns out there are 2 cops with phones and radios less than a mile up the road, and if people who did this get away because we took too long blowing the whistle, well, our decision is going to be questioned harshly. The dash lights made her face look green and sick. Are you saying they'd think we had something to do with it? I don't know, but I'll tell you this. You're not the Duchess of Windsor, and I'm not the Duke of Earl. We're a couple of road bums, is what we are. How much ID do you have? A driver's license? I never took the test. Moved around too much. Social Security? Well, I lost the card someplace. I think I left it behind when I split from the guy who fucked up my ear. But I remember the number. What have you got for actual paperwork? My discount card from Tower Records and Video, she snapped. 2 punches left and I get a free CD. I'm shooting for Out Come the Wolves. Seems fitting, given the soundtrack in these parts. Satisfied? Yeah, he said, and began to laugh. She stared at him for a moment, cheeks green, shadows rippling across her brow, eyes dark, and he felt sure she was going to launch herself at him, and see how much of his skin she could pull off. Then she began to laugh, too. A helpless, screamy sound he didn't care for much. Come here for a second, he said, and held out his hand. Don't you get funny with me, I'm warning you, she said, and she scooted across the seat and into the circle of his arm with no hesitation. He could feel her shoulder trembling against his. She was going to be cold in that tank top if they had to get out of the truck. The temperature fell off the table in this part of the world once the sun went down. You really want to go into town, Lubbock? What I want is to be in Disneyland eating a snow cone, but I think we ought to go up there and take a look. If things are normal, if they feel normal, okay, we'll try reporting it there. But if we see anything that looks the slightest bit wrong, we head for Eli on the double. She looked up at him sullenly. I'm going to hold you to that. You can. He put the truck in gear and began to roll slowly toward the road. To the west, the gold glow, which had been filtering through the sand, was down to an ember. Overhead, hey, get out of my garbage. Thank you. You don't need what's in there. There's a chocolate bar wrapper. Oy. Filtering through the sand was down to an ember. Overhead, more stars were poking through, and they were beginning to shimmy as the flying sand thickened. Steve, you don't happen to have a gun, do you? He shook his head. Thought about going back into the Quonset to look for one, and then put the idea out of his head. He wasn't going back in there. That was all. He just wasn't. No gun. But I got a really big Swiss Army knife. One with all the bells and whistles. I've even got a magnifying glass. Stop fighting over the bone. That makes me feel a lot better. He thought of asking her about the statue, or if she'd had any funny ideas, experimental ideas, but then didn't. Do I need to separate the two of you? Please find out if our daughter put Timber outside. Where's Timber? Nope. Can you please find out if she put him out? And if she did, she needs to come down and let him in. Thank you. All right. Bye. All right, now we can continue. Oh my god. Ouch. Oh, I want pictures. He's so adorable. All right. That makes me feel a lot better. He thought about asking her about the statue and if she'd had any funny ideas, experimental ones, and then didn't. Like the thought was going back like the thought of going back into the coin set building again. It was just too creepy. He turned onto the road, one arm still around her shoulders, and started toward town. The sand blew thickly across the wedge of light. Oh my god! No! Oh my god! I'm gonna start. Oh boy, that was great. I wasn't laughing at that. It was just the idea of it. Like the thought of going back into the Quinset building again, it was just too creepy. He turned onto the road, one arm still around her shoulders, and started toward town. The sand blew thickly across the wedge of light thrown by his high beams, twisting into the yank. Twisting into lank shadows that persistently reminded him of hanged men dangling from hooks. Let's make you blush. As a king. Part 5. The body of his sister was gone from the foot of the stairs, and that was something. David stood looking out through the double doors for a moment. Daylight was fading, and although the sky overhead was still clear, a darkening indigo, the light was dying down here, a ground level and a choke of dust. At ground level and a choke of dust. Across the street, an overhead sign reading Desperation Coffee Shop and Video Stop swung both back and forth in the wind. Sitting beneath it and looking attentively across at him were two more coyotes. Sitting between them, tatty feathers flapping in the wind, like the feathers of some old woman's church and bingo hat, was a large, bald-looking bird David recognized as a buzzard, sitting right between the coyotes. That's impossible, he whispered. And maybe it was, but he was seeing it just the same. He dressed quickly, looking at the door to his left as he did. Printed on the frost glass pane were the words Desperation Town Office, along with the hours, 9 to 4. He tied his sneakers and then opened the door, ready to turn and run if he sensed anything dangerous. If he sensed anything moving, really. But where would he run? Where is there to run? The room beyond the door was gloomy and silent. He groped to his left, expecting something or someone to reach out of the darkness and grab his hand, but nothing did. He found a switch plate, then the switch itself. He flipped it, blinked as his eyes adjusted to the old-fashioned hanging globes, then stepped forward. Straight ahead was a long counter with several barred windows, like teller stations in an old-fashioned bank. One was marked tax clerk, another hunting permits, another mines and essay, and the last one, smaller, bore a sign reading MSHA and Federal Land Use Regs. Spray painted on the wall behind the clerk's area in big red letters was this: in these silences, something may rise. No way. That is great. What did that say? Ooh. got a picture of what I wanted. That's great. In these silences, something may rise. I guess something did, too, David thought, turning his head. Do you mind? I'm reading. You're rude. 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 Oh, go get her. Turning his head to check the other side of the room. Something not very... He never finished the thought. His eyes widened and his hands went to his mouth to stifle the shriek. For a moment, the world went gray, and he believed he might faint. To stop it happening, he took his hands away from his mouth and squeezed them against his temples instead. Renewing the pain there. Then he let them drop to his sides, looking with wide eyes and a hurt, quivering mouth at what was on the wall to the right of the door. There were coat hooks. A Stetson with a snakeskin band hung on the one nearest the windows. Oh my god. A Stetson with a snakeskin band hung on the one nearest the windows. Two women hung on the next two. One shot, the other gutted. The second woman had long red hair and a mouth that was open in a silent, frozen scream. To her left was a man in khaki, his head down, his holster empty. Pearson, maybe, the other deputy. Next to him was a man in jeans and a blood-splattered work shirt. Last in line was Pye. She had been hung up by the back of her motocop's shirt. Cassie Stiles was on it, standing in front of her dream floater van, with her arms folded and a big grin on her face. Cassie had always been Pye's favorite motocop. Pye's head lolled over her broken neck, and her sneakers dangled limply down. Her hands. He kept looking at her hands, small and pink, the fingers slightly open. I can't touch her. I can't go near her. But he could. He had to. Unless he planned to leave her there with Entrogen's other victims. After all, what else was a big brother for? Especially one who wasn't quite big enough to stop the boogeyman from doing such an unspeakable thing in the first place. I laughed because I asked for a picture of something and I actually got it, and it was hilarious. And it wasn't anything bad, it was just hilarious. Next, books. Chest hitching, greenish-white curds of soap drying to scales on his skin. He put his hands together again and raised them in front of his face. Closed his eyes. His voice, when it came out, was trembling so badly he hardly recognized it as his own. God, I know that my sister is with you, and that is just what she left behind. And this is just what she left behind. Please help me do what I have to for her. He opened his eyes again and looked at her. I love you, Pye. I'm sorry for all the times I yelled at you or pulled your braids too hard. The last was too much. He knelt on the floor and put his hands on top of his bowed head and held them there, gasping and trying not to pass out. That's great. I love that. Gasping and trying not to pass out. His tears cut trails in the green goo on his face. What hurt most was the knowledge that the door which had swung shut between them would never be opened, at least not in this world. He would never see Pye go out on a date or shoot a basket from downtown 2 seconds before the buzzer. She would never again ask him to spot her while she stood on her head, or want to know if the light in the refrigerator stayed on even when the door was closed. He understood now why people in the Bible rent their clothes. Wait, they rent their clothes? Where does it say that? When he had control of himself, he dragged one of the chairs, which stood against the wall, over to where she was. He looked at her hands, her pink palms, and his mind wavered again. He forced it steady, just finding he could do that, if he had to, was a welcome surprise. That wavering toward grief returned more insistently, as he stood on the chair and observed the waxy, unnatural pallor of her face and the purplish cast of her lips. Cautiously, he let some of the grief in. He sensed it would be better for him if he did. This was the first dead person, but it was also Pie, and he did not want to be scared of her or grossed out by her. So it was better to feel sorry, and he did. He did. Hurry, David. He wasn't sure if that was his voice or the others, but this time it didn't matter. The voice was right. Pie was dead, but his father and the others weren't. The upstairs weren't. And then there was his mother. That was the worst thing. In a way, even worse than what had happened to Pie, because he didn't know. The crazy cop had taken his mother somewhere, and he might be doing anything to her. Anything. I won't think about that. I won't let myself. He thought instead of all the hours Pye had spent in front of the TV with Melissa's sweetheart in her lap, watching Crazy tunes. Professor Crazy had yielded his place of honor in her heart to the moto cops, especially Cassie Stiles and the handsome Colonel Henry, over the last year or so. But the old prof still seemed like the right answer to David. The dog has anxiety and is licking the chair arm. Okie dokie. He only remembered one of Professor or Prof. Crazy's little songs, and he sang it now as he slipped his arms around the dead girl and lifted her free of the hook. This old man, he played one. Her head fell against his shoulder. It was amazingly heavy. How had she ever held it up all day long, as little as she was? He played knick-knack on my thumb. He turned, stepped clumsily down the chair, staggered but did not fall, and took Pie over to the windows. He smoothed her shirt down in the back as he went. It was torn, but only a little. He laid her down, one hand under her neck to keep from bumping her head on the floor. It was the way Mom had showed him when Pie had been just a baby, and he asked to hold her. Had he sung to her then? He couldn't remember. He supposed he might have. With a knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone. Ugly, dark green drapes hung at the sides of the windows, which were narrow 9-foot floor-to-ceiling jobs. David tugged one down. Professor Crazy Prof goes rolling home. He laid the drape out beside his sister's body, singing the stupid little song over again. He wished he could give her Melissa's sweetheart to keep her company, but Melissa was back by the Wayfarer. He lifted Pie onto the drape and folded the bottom half over her. It came all the way up to her neck, and she looked better to him now, a lot, as if she were at home, sleeping in bed. With a knick-knack, paddywhack, give a dog a bone, he sang again. Crazy Prof went rolling home. He kissed her forehead. I love you, Pie, he said, and he drew the top of the drape over her. He remained beside her for a moment, with his hands clasped tightly between his thighs, trying to get control of his emotions again. When he felt steadier, he got to his feet. The wind was howling. Daylight was almost gone, and the sound of the dust against the window panes was like the light tapping of many fingers. He could hear a harsh, monotonous squeaking sound. Creak, 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 as something turned in the wind. And he jumped when something else out there in the growing darkness fell over with a bang. He turned from the window and went hesitantly around the counter. There were no more bodies, but papers had been spilled behind the window marked tax clerk, and there were spots of dry blood on some of them. The tax clerk's high-backed, long-legged chair had been knocked over. Behind the counter area was an open safe. David saw more stacks of papers, but no money, and nothing that looked disturbed. To the right was a small cluster of desks. To the left were two closed doors. Behind, both with gold letters on them. The one marked Fire Chief didn't interest him, but the other, the office of the town safety officer, did. Jim Reed, that was his name. Town safety officer. Would you call chief of police in a bigger burg? David murmured, and went over to the door. It was unlocked. He felt along the wall, located the light switch, and flickered it. The first thing he saw, when the lights came on, was a huge caribou's head on the wall to the left of the desk. Second was the man behind the desk. He was tilted back in his office chair, except for the ballpoint pens sticking out of his eyes and the desk plate protruding from his mouth. He might have been sleeping there. That was how relaxed his posture was. His hands had been laced together across his ample belly. He was wearing a khaki shirt and a across-the-chest belt like estrogens. Outside, something else fell over, and coyotes howled in unison, like a doo-wop group from hell. David jumped, then glanced over his shoulder to make sure Estrogen wasn't sneaking up on him. He wasn't. David looked back at the town safety officer. He knew what he had to do, and he thought if he could touch Pie, he could probably touch the stranger. First, however, he picked up the phone. He expected it to be dead, and it was. He hit the cut-off buttons a time or two anyway, saying, "Hello? Hello? Room service! Send me up a room," he thought, and shivered as he put the handset back in the cradle. He went around the desk and stood next to the cop with the pens in his eyes. The dead man's name plaque, James Reed, town safety officer, was still on his desk, so the one in his mouth was something else. Ops here was printed on the part sticking out between his teeth. David could smell something familiar, not aftershave or cologne. He looked at the dead man's folded hands, saw the deep cracks in the skin, and understood. It was hand lotion he smelled, either the same stuff his mother used or something similar. Jim Reed must have finished rubbing some into his hands not long before he was killed. David tried to look into Reed's lap and couldn't. The man was too fat and pulled in too close to his desk for David to be able to see what he needed to see. There was a small black hole in the center of the chair back that he could see just fine. Reed had been shot. The thing with the pens had been done, David hoped, after he was already dead. "Get going, hurry!" He started to pull the chair back, then shouted with surprise and jumped out of the way when it overbalanced almost at his touch and spilled Jim Reed's dead weight onto the floor. The corpse uttered a great dead belch as it hit. The plaque in his mouth flew out like a missile, leaving its silo. It landed upside down, and David could read it with no trouble just the same. "The buck stops here." Heart pounding harder than ever, he dropped to one knee beside the body. Reed's uniform pants were unbuttoned and unzipped, exposing some decidedly non-reg underdrawers, vast silk, peach-colored. But David barely noticed these. He was looking for something else, and he sighed with relief when he saw it. On one well-padded hip was Reed's service revolver. On the other was a key chain clipped to a belt loop. Biting his lower lip, somehow sure that the dead cop was going to reach out. "Oh shit, the mummy's after us!" and grab him. David struggled to free the keys from the belt loop. At first the clip wouldn't open for him, but he finally he was able to get it loose. He picked through the keys quickly, praying to find what he needed, and he did. The square one that didn't look like a key at all. A black magnetic strip ran down its length. The key in its the key to the holding cells upstairs, he hoped, anyway. David put the keyring in his pocket and glanced curiously at Reed's open pants again, then unsnapped the strap over the cop's gun. He pulled it out, holding it in both hands, feeling its extraordinary weight and sense of inhaled violence. A revolver, not an automatic with bullets buried away in the handle. David turned the muzzle toward himself, careful to keep his fingers outside the trigger guard so he could look at the cylinder. There were bullet heads in every hole he could see. So that was probably all right. The first chamber might be empty. In the movies, cops sometimes did that to keep from shooting themselves by accident. But he reckoned that wouldn't matter if he pulled the trigger at least twice and fast. He turned the gun around again and inspected it from the butt forward, looking for the safety catch. He didn't see one, and very gingerly pulled back on the trigger a little. When he saw the hammer start to rise out of its hood, he let off the pressure in a hurry. He didn't want to fire the gun down here. He didn't know how smart coyotes were, and he guessed that if they were smart about anything, it would probably be about guns. He went back out into the main office. The wind howled, throwing sand against the window. Panes were bruised purple now. Soon they'd be black. He looked over at the ugly green curtain and the shape which lay beneath it. Love you, Pie, he thought, and then went back out into the hall. Oh, Jesus. He went back into the hall. He stood there a moment, taking deep breaths, eyes closed, gun held at his side with the muzzle pointed at the floor. God, I never shot a gun in my life, he said. Please help me be able to shoot this one. Jesus' sake, amen. That taken care of, David started up the stairs. And this is going into chapter 3. So we're done with chapter 2. We did that today. So tomorrow we'll read chapter 3, whether it's in one sitting or a couple, like today. Chapter 2 took us 3 sittings, which isn't bad. Like 2.5 hours, I guess. Plus I got interruptions. But yeah, we will continue reading tomorrow. We are this far into the book. And this is what we got left. See that? We're pretty far in. It is, let's see how many pages. 690 pages, and we are at 272. So we are almost halfway, which is really good. So we can do that. It's getting late, so I don't want to stay up too much longer because then I'll just pass out at my desk. At the same time, I'm trying to read Misery, and the beginning of it was just, it read like an instruction manual at first. Boy. But we'll see how that goes. Again, I want to thank you guys for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And my craziness with my dogs. I apologize if anybody jumped and whatnot. Oh no. That's not good. Hardback, softback, Kindle. The books are in 3 forms, I do believe. For Stephen King. I started reading Under the Dome, and I've been hooked on Stephen King since. And I've tried to read over the years, and it just wasn't letting me. And finally, I was able to. So now that the kids are out of school and I don't have much to do as far as them, I'm able to sit and read. I also listen to YouTube. I was listening to Disturbing 911 earlier. They are disturbing. Anyway, I am going to let you guys go. I try not to talk too much I don't want to bore y'all, especially with my voice trying to go out again. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for sitting here and, listening to me read. It's going to probably, take us like 25, 30 parts to get through, but that's okay. It's all right. So I think I might upload what I've got so far since we've got a couple parts in, and upload that to YouTube. So I can just keep doing that every day. Running Man's already up there. So far it hasn't been taken down. Yay! Anyway, I will talk to y'all later. Y'all have a good night, good day, depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the US and it's going to nighttime, so it's almost midnight. It's time for me to sleep. Anyway, love you guys. Subscribe if you haven't. Thank you for subscribing if you have, or following, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, doesn't matter. I appreciate you all the same. Just sitting here with me, like being in our own little reading group. Honestly, really nice. So, love y'all. Y'all have a good night. Thank you.